This is surprising. Mortal Shell just dropped a full gameplay reveal, and within the first few minutes, you're already watching a stealth character go invisible, land a clean-ass backstab, chain it into a parry, and then immediately pull out a shotgun and blast two enemies point blank. And it doesn't stop there. Later in the trailer, there's a full-on Gatling gun just mowing things down like it's a completely different genre. So right away, I already see the differences from the first one. It still has that same heavy, oppressive atmosphere from the first game. The environments are dark, bodies everywhere, enemies look grotesque, everything feels hostile. But at the same time, it's way more aggressive and way less restrained than before. That combination is either going to make this one of the most interesting Souls-likes in a long time, or something that can completely lose what made the first game special. If you never played the first Mortal Shell, it didn't exactly dominate the genre, but it built a really strong reputation with the people who actually gave it a shot. And the reason for that wasn't because it had the best combat or the most content, it was the atmosphere. It really understood what made early Souls games feel the way they did. That sense of isolation, the slow exploration, the feeling that you're walking through a world that's already dead and you don't really belong there. And when you look at how it was made, it makes even more sense why people respected it. The entire game was built by a team of 4 people. That's right, 4. And despite that, it still managed to sell around 2 million copies, which is incredibly impressive considering how niche these games can be. So now you fast forward to Mortal Shell 2, and the team has grown to around 30 developers. That's still small compared to most studios, but you can already see where the extra manpower is going just from this gameplay. The scale is bigger, the systems look more expanded, there's more variety in what you're seeing. It's a big step up in terms of graphics. It feels like they actually have the resources now to push their ideas further, and they're clearly taking advantage of that. The first thing that really stands out when you watch this trailer is just how different the pacing feels compared to the original. The first Mortal Shell was slower. You had to think about what you were doing, commit to your attacks, and manage your positioning really carefully. It had that deliberate, almost methodical feel that you expect from a Souls-like. This one feels like it's constantly pushing you forward. But at the start, you're watching Teal, the stealth-focused Shell from the first game, and he's moving really fast. He goes invisible, sets up backstabs, chains attacks together in a way that looks way smoother than in the previous game. There's even a moment where he lands a backstab, immediately transitions into a parry, then follows it up with a running attack. It looks so clean and responsive, and it feels a lot more fluid than what the first game was doing. And then, like I said before, he just pulls out a shotgun. They're clearly more open to just adding things because they're fun, because they look fucking cool and make combat more exciting. As the trailer keeps going, you start noticing the pattern more and more. The combat looks faster, the animations look more aggressive, enemies are more over the top, and the overall tone feels less restrained. It's still dark fantasy, but it's leaning way harder into the spectacle side of things. I think that shift is probably going to be the biggest talking point with this game. I'm really left wondering how it's all going to fit into the story itself, as some people are definitely going to look at it and think it's drifting too far away from what made the first one work in the first place. Either way, it definitely doesn't feel safe, and that alone makes it worth paying attention to. One thing that hasn't changed, and really shouldn't, is the core identity of Mortal Shell itself, which is the shell system. Instead of building your character from scratch like in most Souls-likes, you're essentially inhabiting different bodies. These shells are fallen warriors scattered throughout the world, and each one comes with its own stats, abilities, and playstyle. So instead of respeccing or experimenting through menus, you're physically switching how you play depending on which shell you're using. In the first game, that system carried a lot of variety. You weren't overwhelmed with options, but each shell felt distinct enough that it changed how you approached fights. Some were tankier, some were more aggressive, some leaned into stamina efficiency or survivability. And from what's shown in the trailer, that idea is being expanded quite a bit. There are clearly more shells this time around. You can spot returning ones like Teal, Haros, Eridrim, but there are also new additions, including one called Proxima. Just from the footage alone, it looks like the total number is sitting somewhere around 8, which is already a noticeable increase from the first game. And that matters because this system is what separates Mortal Shell from the rest of the genre. If they get this right, if each shell actually feels unique and worth using, that'll really make it stand out from the pack, or hundreds or maybe even thousands of Souls-likes that exist nowadays. The bigger shift though isn't the shells, it's how the combat itself is being handled, with the most obvious change being the removal of stamina. It's a pretty big deal for a game like this. Stamina has always been one of the main things that defines Souls-style combat. It controls your pacing, forces you to be careful, and punishes you if you get greedy. Every swing, every dodge, every mistake is tied to that system. Here, the limitation is gone. You can swing continuously, dodge repeatedly, and stay aggressive without worrying about draining a bar. And you can already see how that changes the flow of combat just from the trailer. Fights look faster, less restricted, more about momentum than careful resource management. If we use Souls-likes as a reference, I guess this will be their Sekiro-like? Now, that doesn't automatically make it better or worse, but it does change the feel completely. Instead of that slow, deliberate pacing, where every action has weight, this looks like it's encouraging constant pressure. You're moving more, attacking more, and reacting much faster. At the same time, it makes me wonder how it's going to be balanced. A big part of what made those older systems work was tension. You know, the need to hold back, to choose the right moment to strike. Without that, the challenge has to come from somewhere else. Maybe it's enemy design, maybe how much damage you take, could be positioning, something that keeps fights from turning into button mashing. It looks like they're trying to compensate with more aggressive enemies and more chaotic encounters. Now, if that fully replaces the original tension is something that's going to depend on how it feels in actual gameplay. We'll need to get our hands on it. Another area where the sequel is expanding is the world itself. The first Mortal Shell didn't rely on size. It wasn't a massive game, but it didn't need to be. The world was tightly connected, easy to get lost in, and really dense for what it was. Exploration felt rewarding because everything was placed with intention. This time around, the approach is a bit different, as they've described it as a compact open world, which basically means it's larger in scope, but still controlled. It's not trying to be a massive empty landscape. Instead, it's focused on having a lot more structured content, packed into a more manageable space. They're also mentioning over 60 handcrafted dungeons and structures, which lines up with what the first game did well. That kind of design works in their favor, especially if they keep the same level of detail and environmental storytelling. They've also added a few things on top of that. There's a world map now, which wasn't present in the original. In the first game, you had to learn the layout on your own, figure out where things connected, and rely on your own memory. That added to the sense of being lost, but it could also be frustrating. Here, navigation is going to be a lot more straightforward. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think that was actually one of its strengths. There's also fast travel between checkpoints, and even a moment in the trailer where the player climbs to the top of a structure, looks out over the world, and selects a destination from there. So, a better way of moving between areas instead of constantly backtracking on foot. All of that points to a game that's larger and more accessible, but still trying to maintain that dense, interconnected feeling that worked so well the first time around. That accessibility thing though, that can be a double-edged sword. Later on in the trailer, it stops feeling like a normal Souls-like and starts doing its own thing. You already see hints of it with the shotgun. It comes out fast with no build-up, no explanation, just straight into the fight. Later on, it goes even further. As I said a bit earlier, there's a sequence where the player pulls out a Gatling gun and just starts tearing through enemies. It doesn't look like they're overly concerned with keeping everything as straightforward as before. If something adds impact, if it makes combat feel better or look better, it goes in. And that same mindset shows up in other parts of the trailer too. Enemy design leans heavily into that. You've got these oversized, distorted enemies that don't look clean or uniform at all. There's even one with a crossbow fused into his head, just walking toward you like a wall. Others look like they've been pulled straight out of like a horror movie or something. The environments really match that direction too. It has that same oppressive feeling from the first game, but is being pushed further visually. The first game kept things tight. This one feels like it's expanding in every direction at once. More intensity, more visual impact, and even more willingness to throw something unexpected into the middle of a fight. The shells are still doing most of the heavy lifting when it comes to how the game plays, and you can see that pretty clearly depending on which one is on screen. Teal gets the most attention in the trailer, but Eredrim gets a bit of time too and feels completely different the moment he shows up. He's heavier, more direct, built around taking hits and returning them harder too. His abilities reward timing, especially when it comes to parries. You can see the game pushing you to stand your ground more with him instead of constantly moving. Then there's Proxima, who stands out right away because of how she controls space. That hook ability pulls enemies in and forces the fight to happen on her terms. On top of that, she can shrug off some of the pressure with reduced damage and less stagger, which makes her feel harder to interrupt once she gets going. Even outside of those, the trailer shows several other shells that you don't get full context for yet, but it's clear they're aiming for more variety across the board. That variety matters so much more here because the change in pace of combat is so much higher now. The differences between shells need to show up immediately, not after hours and hours of play. From what's been shown, each one has a clear identity the moment you see it in action. The fights themselves carry more weight this time, mostly because of how enemies behave and how the animations are handled. There's more presence to them. The larger ones move slower but still feel imposing, while others are quicker and force you to react faster. It creates a different rhythm depending on what you're up against, even within the same area. The riposte really surprised me too. They're not quick throwaway animations this time. Each one is drawn out just enough to land. The impact feels heavier, and the way they connect with different enemies gives them more character. It turns a basic mechanic into something you actually notice every time it happens. There's also a moment in the trailer where the player gets knocked out of their shell during the fight. The mechanic is still here, and it still adds pressure in a different way this time. You're not just watching your health, you're watching for the moment when you lose your protection entirely and have to recover mid-fight. Near the end, there's a quick sequence showing several bosses back to back. You don't get to see full encounters just yet, but the designs are enough to get a sense of what they're going for. Larger scale, more aggressive, much more visually distinct. In the first game, bosses are one of the stronger parts of the experience, and here they look like they're being pushed even further in the same direction. Now, the atmosphere. You still get the same feeling from the first game. You get the sense that you're not supposed to be there. There's even a small moment where the player sits down and plays an instrument for a few seconds. It doesn't do anything gameplay-wise, but it adds to the sense of isolation. You're just sitting there in the middle of nowhere with nothing around you but dead space and sound. I really enjoyed that from the first game, and it looks like they understood that too. Even with everything going on and the faster combat, that underlying mood is still there holding everything together. From what's shown here, this looks like a much more confident version of the first game. They're not playing it safe anymore, and they're not trying to stay locked into what people expect from a Soulslike. They've taken the core of what worked, the atmosphere, the shell system, the world design, and started pushing everything else outward. Some of those changes are going to land better than others. The faster combat, the lack of stamina, the weapons they're throwing in. All of that is going to change how the game feels in a big way. It doesn't feel like it's trying to sit next to something like Dark Souls anymore. It feels more like it's trying to stand on its own, even if that means taking a few risks along the way. And right now, that's enough to keep it on my radar. Now, I'm curious what you guys think after seeing all of this. Does this direction work for you, or does it feel like it's going too far? Because it's definitely working for me. Now, if you played the first game, I'm especially interested to hear how this looks compared to what you remember. Drop your thoughts down in the comments, I'll be checking through them as usual. And if you enjoyed the video, hit like, subscribe, all that usual stuff. It really helps the channel out. I got a few more vids like this coming up, especially with everything that's been dropping lately. Appreciate you watching, and as always, have a great one.